All right, so everybody should be able to sign in or kind of quasi sign in with your email, password. You should get a response, and in the response, we should have a user. And we're sending all this user back. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it last time, but you would never want to just blanket send the user back like this. This was just strictly to test it, make sure we're getting the user just so we could see everything working. But we're going to clean this up. And like I said, you would never send the user back in this fashion. Because there's a bunch of information you don't want the front end to be able to know, like the actual ID, the password, even though it's encrypted, you still don't want to send that to the front. The rest of the stuff is probably fine, but mainly the ID and password, you really won't want to send that. But we'll clean all that up. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to some back end stuff, and then we'll come back to the front end. So inside of our controllers folder, this is the root directory, we have an auth folder, and inside of auth, we will make a sign-in controller. So new file, sign underscore in.js. And then we'll do module.exports. And then we'll make our controller, our request, response, and then whatever we wanted to actually do. All right, we'll add our try catch block. We'll say try doing something. If that doesn't work, catch it, error. And then for now, we'll do some better error handling. But for now, if it makes it here, we'll say response dot status. We'll just blanket throw a 500 error for now. And then response dot status dot send error signing in.
Yeah, the singing.
Singing in.
Yeah, I'm really confused right now. Singing. Oh, thank God.
Now do you understand what's going on now? All right, and then we're just going to recreate what it was already doing. So we're just going to say response dot send back an object, success true, and then user is equal to request dot user. Everybody good? Okay. So now we're going to go down to our routes, auth. Oh, wait, hold on. Before we do that, let's go to controllers auth index. So in the folder that we just made the sign in, go to that index. And then we'll add sign in and require this directory sign in.
Yes, we got it. We got this. Oh, let's say here's underscore, but it's on this too.
This is the file name. So it's just whatever the file name is. And then we'll go down to routes auth index. Routes auth index. And then
Which index? Just auth index. Okay.
yep, routes auth index should look like this. And then up here where we're importing or requiring stuff from controllers auth, we're already requiring them to sign up. We're going to add in here sign in. After you type a few letters, it should show up. And then we're going to replace what we kind of just threw in here before with sign in. All right. So once we have those changes made, we should be able to test it, and we should essentially get the same result we were getting before, but just make sure it's still working. So we should be able to go to our front end code, or not our front end code, and you don't even have to refresh the page. So if your email and password is still here, you should be able to click sign in again, and it'll either work or it won't. And you should have your user.
So don't refresh the page.
You don't need to. It doesn't hurt if you do, but anytime you make server-side code, you don't have to refresh your front-end code. Because when it makes the new request, it's making the request to the updated server, so you don't have to refresh the front end. Everyone good? So I want to explain a couple things before we go a little bit further. So when we make it to our sign-in controller, notice we have this request.user. Okay, we're getting all the user information from somewhere. We're not doing any checks here or anything to validate the user or get the user information. If we look at our index routes, we added this function require sign-in first. This is called middleware. Okay. So middleware is something that happens before it gets to that final controller. Okay. Middleware is just a function that does whatever you need it to do. In this case, this middleware is created from Passport, and it takes the initial request is sending forward that email and password. So this middleware checks for the email and password and then does all the stuff we told it to do. If we go over to our Passport services Passport file, this actually gets called here. All this stuff that we wrote. So we lowercase the email, check the database to see if we could find somebody with that email. If not, we return false. You'd get an unauthorized. Then we check to make sure the password is valid. If it's not, same thing. We say false. That would return unauthorized. And then if it makes it past all of that, that means we have a user and the email and password matched. So we're sending that to the next thing. Done. Sometimes you'll see done called next. Is actually probably more common than done. And you're saying go to the next thing. And the next thing in this case is our function, which is this. And in this middleware, it takes this user and adds it onto the request object. So that's why in sign in, we're able to do request.user, has all the user information. So we're going to write some other middleware that using a web token also adds the user onto the request. So anytime we want to require sign in, we'll use a piece of middleware like this that will get the user information for us and validate the user. And then by the time it makes it to our controller, we'll have access to the user. So if it makes it there, the user's already been verified and everything. So what we want to do now when the user signs in, what we actually want to send back is we want to send back two things. One, we want to send back a token that the user could use for any subsequent requests, and then we could use that token to validate the user. So we need to generate the token. We also want to clean up the actual user data that we're sending. Okay? So we're going to make a couple of helper functions because we're going to need to do those two things in more than one place. So inside of the root directory, we have this helpers folder. And in it, we will make a new file called auth.js. And the first thing we do is we'll make a little helper function to clean up the user data. Okay, so we'll say exports dot user data to send. That will equal a function that will get a user object passed to it. And then we will return an object of only information we want to send forward. So we probably want to send like their email forward. So we'll say email user.email. Probably going to want to send their public ID forward. So public ID. Actually, I don't know that we'll need the public ID. We can always come back and change it. We'll leave that. Yeah, let's go ahead and send the public ID actually. Okay, public ID user.public ID. I don't know if we'll actually need it, but we'll send it. And then we probably want like the user's name. So name. And I think we stored, how did we store their name? That's what I was thinking. So we stored, yeah, first name and last name. So we could make a decision on how, do we want to send back just the first name and last name? Do you want to do like first name, last initial, just the first name? What do you guys think? Because we're going to use this to first name, last initial. So here we'll say like backticks and then $ curly brackets, user dot first name, and then space, $ curly brackets, and then user dot last name at index 0 just to get the first letter. And then we can make sure that is always capitalized. So we can say dot to uppercase. That's a function. We'll call that. And then outside of the parentheses, we'll add a period showing that we abbreviated it.
Well, you have to have the index at 0 for last name.
Because we just want the first letter.
Huh?
What do you have dot in end?
Huh?
What do you have dot in end?
Just put a period after the last letter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you don't need to.
We can format it however we want. So we're just formatting it as the first name, last initial, with a period after the last initial because it's initial.
This ES6 structure or is 2015 structure? How you?
It's both.
So that's the same thing.
Well, the backticks. This is the string template literal is ES6. Everything else is old. Only thing that's new is the backticks and the $ curly brackets for concatenating the string together. But nothing else is new. Like, that's just accessing a property in an object, accessing a property in an object, accessing a letter in a word,
I just mean
capitalizing.
How is it better to name it? 2015 syntax or ES6 syntax?
Oh, like how he's saying, like how do you reference what we're?
It's the syntax is backticks. How you concatenate. This one is like new, but what is the right name?
Either one.
ES6
Either one. There isn't. It depends on who you're talking to.
Say yes.
Okay.
Yeah. ES6 is shorter.
I remember your ES6.
You're saying like instead of like
Huh?
concatenating it?
I remember
No.
your ES6 lecture.
They
describe
have
it.
fucking different, like different people. They call it differently. Some people they don't call it ES6. They just call it.
Yeah. Some people. Yeah. Some people call it ES.
2015 syntax.
Yeah. Some people do, and some people call it ES. Like I said, there's not a right answer to it.
Okay, I got it.
All right. Everybody good here? So what we can do now that we made this, we can actually test it. So we'll go back to sign in. At the top of sign in, we will import our little helper we made. So we'll say const curly brackets equals
Where you are on that sign.
the sign in file inside of controllers, inside of auth.
Okay.
Sign in. All right. So require and then backend directory, helpers / auth. Probably gonna regret this. Should have put an index file in there. And then we'll say user data to send. And then down here where we're sending the user, we'll say user data to send. We'll call that and we'll pass it our request user. All right, and we can test that and make sure that in our response on our front end that we're getting only the data that we're expecting. I'm going to go back to it, but I want to test it. So once again, we don't have to refresh anything. We just hit sign in and data. And then see for the user, you can see the name is formatted how we expect. We have the email and then we have their public ID. So that's perfect. That's a good amount of information to send forward. We can, use their name and stuff. We have their email and we have the public ID in case for whatever reason we need it for something.
What you were saying earlier about that, it's kind of like when different parts of the country, you'll call soda in one place, pop, Coke, depends where you're at. Same with that.
Yeah, it just depends on who you're talking to.
People like that.
And everybody thinks they're right.
What do you call Diet Coke again? Elixir of the gods.
Looks really good too.
Yeah, see, we all call it.
That's what it is.
It's true.
Everybody test and make sure they're getting the right data.
I don't have right data. I have still old data. I have to restart
You
it.
didn't change.
What I did? What did I change?
You shouldn't have to restart anything.
User
you
data
did-
is the same.
user
I
equals,
didn't. I didn't change that one.
You're just checking by just submitting again?
Yeah.
And I didn't get any.
User.
If you get a response, go to data user.
Yeah, open it. Oh, look at the data and see that
Yeah,
it's.
oh, it's there. Looking good.
No, she did. If you get typing class, why you type those things?
You
Look at the keyboard.
you need to go
lines.
in and try to type on my language.
Oh, okay.
Well,
That's
more than anything is he types everything out. Like you got to learn to use your shortcuts, man.
on the con.
I haven't figured out how to do that with VS Code yet. Like when I do div and then tab, it like doesn't make
That's the user data.
an element.
Figure that out, man.
Well,
It's very time
VS
consuming.
Code recently.
Very time consuming. You got to change the file types to all the JS files to React.
User data.
That should fix it. We good?
That's like with an extension, you have
It should work now.
What? No,
What are you saying? Changing process to React? No?
no, it's built into VS Code.
What's weird is I'll change it on one page and then the next.
You got to
page-
change associate all file types. Here, watch my screen really quick. Show you how to do it. So down at the bottom where it says JavaScript, or even if it says JavaScript React, click on that,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
and then do configure file association for JS. Click on that, and then type React,
JavaScript React.
and then JavaScript React, and that will associate all JavaScript files with React.
From now on or just?
Always, yeah. All projects, all everything.
Wow. You don't have time.
Yeah, and then that'll fix all your emits and
Oh, wait.
all good. All right. So we formatted the user data. What we need to do now is we need to send a token. So to send a token, we have to generate the token. And once again, we'll do this in our helpers file. So in helpers and then auth, the one where we did our user data to send. So we installed, I believe we installed it already. Let me verify that we installed it. So we installed this nice little package called JWT Simple. It's very simple to use, hence the name.
You just did it right now.
We already did that
Okay, cool.
a long time ago. So up at the top, we're going to say const JWT equals require JWT simple. All right, and then we need a secret for our web token. I feel like we made it, but let me double check. So we should find our config folder, jwt.js. So you should have inside your config folder, you should have a jwt.js, and you should have a secret. And it doesn't matter what the secret is, just a random bunch of characters. Especially locally, even if it's just a couple of characters long, that's fine. On your server, you definitely want something more robust because the more complex and longer this is, the more secure your tokens will be. Everybody good with that?
No. Did we change anything just now or no?
No, we did not change anything. Need you to pay attention though. So need that.
So the auth JS is in the auth that we changed, added the constant is in the helpers folder, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
so no it's config.
All right, so now we're going to also import that secret key that we just checked for. So we're going to say const curly brackets equals require backend directory config, and then we're going to chain on to the back of this dot jwt config. And then we're going to secret. secret. Don't tell no one. And then we're going to say exports dot token for user, and we'll pass in a user object. And then we'll say return JWT dot encode. All right, and then that takes an object. The first parameter of encode is whatever data you want to encode. And you can put anything in here. Anything that you want to be able to decode out of this, you can put in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the user ID. And that's going to come from the user we're passing in, user.id. And then that's all we really need, honestly. And that's all we're going to use it in the beginning. Down the road, we might want to like expire the token. So we might care of like when this token was created. So just for future reference, just for future proofing, we'll add a timestamp in here. So we'll say timestamp or TS or tough shit, depending on how you want to interpret it. And we'll assign that to a new date.get time, which gives us the milliseconds since 1970. It's what it really does.
Yeah, it's January 16th.
Yeah, no, January 1st. Yeah, midnight.
Is that ever gonna get changed eventually? Like once it hits like, or it's gonna keep going?
No, it's probably gonna keep going.
Dude,
Dude, it would break everything if they tried
Yeah, I
to
was
change
about to
it.
say.
Because like every computer system in the world uses that. Yeah.
Is there like a problem in 2000?
Yeah, you have to live by like 3K.
Was that related to?
It would be like
Not directly related to that.
Okay.
No, the biggest thing is a lot of places where they were storing the year, they were only storing 2 digits for the year. So like 89, 90. So when it went to 00, it would have read as 1900. Yeah, that was the problem.
line 12. You could go ahead and keep going. You want to do like that row?
Yep. Switching back and forth from front end and back end, I always do that shit.
Was it a legitimate problem though? Like that was gonna be difficult. You know,
It was a little overhyped, I thought.
I think it was overhyped.
yeah, it made it sound like it was
Right.
I mean, I could see where like stuff would have broke, but I can't imagine anything breaking dramatically bad. But maybe, I don't know.
With
the timestamp, would you want it like when they currently did that, or would you like take that current thing plus like say you're gonna do 24 hours for you to respond? Like
No, so when we check for it, that's where we'll do the calculation to see like if it's a week old or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll come back.
I'm gonna leave, but I'll be back later.
Going back to Spain or what?
Back. Getting out of here.
All right, everybody good? So we have this neat little function that should generate a token. If you wanted to get fancy with it, we could shorten this up to just be get rid of these. There we go, fancy.
I'll take ugly.
Huh?
I'll take ugly one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just like a different way of writing it.
Yeah, it's doing the exact nothing. Didn't change anything. I just know some people get really uppity and I can write it fancy. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
If you want to write it fancy, that's how you can do it. All right. So now that we have our fancy token for user, we could go back to sign in. So everyone's good here, right?
So the reason why we're doing is we're kind of encrypting the ID because we don't want to show the user the actual ID.
Yeah, we're encrypting any data we could use later to check for that user again. We're going to build the other side of it in a minute. So
JWT, it's helping to encrypt.
No, it is encrypting. It's creating a token. This function actually creates the token, and whatever object you pass it here is encrypted into the long string we're going to get. So this data is actually stored in the encryption.
The token is actually just an encrypted
string. Yeah, it's an encrypted object.
The user. It's not like
it's whatever information you want to put into it.
I thought the token was just itself, its own like thing.
Nope.
I didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah, it's a huge misconception. Because I see students with the wrong idea.
The token is basically just an object.
So it's a string, but it just has encrypted JSON data in it. That's why it's called a JSON web token, because it has encrypted JSON data in it. And I actually forgot something, guys. Sorry. The JWT.encode takes a second argument that is our secret, because it uses that to encrypt it.
So it's in the very end.
Huh? It's a second argument to encode. So think of how functions work. It's the second argument to encode.
And here.
Go over left one. Press left. No.
That kind of thing worries me, Sasha.
Press left.
When I tell you it's a second argument, you're having trouble.
Yeah, I have trouble.
I know you know, Sasha. I know you know.
Yep.
All right, we all good? All right, so one more step and then we can test it. So now we'll jump back over to our sign-in controller. So in the controller folder, auth, and then sign in. So up at the top, where we're importing user data to send, we'll also now pull in token for user. Token for user. No token for you. All right, and then with the data we sent to the front end, we'll add a token property, and then we'll call token for user. That is a function we will call it. It needs a user to be passed in, so we'll say request user. Bada bing, bada boom. And now we can test it. So now you should be able to go sign in, look at the data you got sent back, and you should have a token. Allegedly.
What about you? You're gonna have token too.
Hopefully. So let's check this out. So I'm going to clear my console, re-sign in. Data, there it is, token.
When you're handing out a token, does it have to be like for particular tasks? So if you're like, say you're resetting a password and you give somebody a token.
So those work a little different.
Okay.
Those work a little different. So if we get to it, we could do a password reset, or if you guys are more worried about user authentication stuff, we could do a user password once we get all the user auth stuff working, or a reset.
Gotcha.
So that works more traditionally how I think people conceive a token working, where it's like saved in a database, and then you check the database for the token, like when you're resetting a password, or like an email verification for when someone creates the account.
Yeah.
Like those tokens, you just generate a random string, save it in the database, and then they send it forward. And like I said, we could do that.
So what is this one intended to be for?
This is used for persistent login.
Okay.
Is for one thing, and the other thing that this is good for is, so every time now when we make an API request, we're going to send this token with it and then we're going to validate that, okay, that token relates to a real user. We could send the data to them.
Okay.
So it's authentication for all of our API requests.
Okay. So hypothetically, if he's like, oh, I'm adding a shopping cart, it's like I'm gonna send a token and be like, okay, that item is associated with that user. And
Yeah, and it gives us access to the user and all of our controllers and stuff too.
Okay.
So it's a form of authentication.
Do we have to say somehow that token on front end?
We will. We have more to do on the back end first. Everybody get their token?
I have one. A token is not in user string.
Yeah.
Token is up
Yes.
or down, somewhere else.
Yeah, it's not inside. No, so user is its own property, and then token's its own property. You can see up there, it's however we built it here, that's how the front end's going to receive it.
First, I was thinking I don't have a token, and then I find it. I think he has the same thing. He just watched inside the user.
Yeah, so
No, I just didn't put singing yet. I just didn't. Like, yeah.
So I understand you're taking notes, and that's very
Yeah,
helpful for
I'm
everybody,
fine.
but you need to be keeping up with the lectures. Okay. All right. Everybody good? All right. So now that we have that, so what we could do now is what we need to do is we need to make a thing that's going to be useful in two ways for us. We're going to use Passport to set up our JWT handlers. Essentially, we're going to create a middleware using Passport that we could pass it that token, and it will give us back the user. Okay, so it's going to decrypt that token, pull the user ID, query the database, and then give us the user in any of our controllers. And then we'll also set it up so that we have a JWT sign-in. So we can just, like, when the app first loads, we can send that token and then get user data back. Okay?
So that way you can not include the user on URL and nowhere.
Yeah, because you should never be doing that. All right, so let's go down to services folder, which is in the root directory, and the Passport file. Okay, so we already started and we already built our local strategy. Now we're going to build a JWT strategy. As soon as I find my cheat sheet. All right. So first thing we're going to do is just like we did with the local stuff is we're going to do a little config object. So we're going to say const JWT options equals an object. All right. And then we're going to do JWT from request. Okay, so we're configuring where in the request that the token is going to be. So we're telling Passport where to find the token in each request. So we are going to send the token in the headers. So we're going to say extract JWT dot from header. And then we're going to tell it which header to extract it from. And we could tell it anything. We just have to make sure we send it on the same header. And the one I normally use is authorize. But it could be anything. It doesn't matter what it is. We're telling it right now, this is where we want you to look. So now whenever we send requests that need authorization, we're going to send it on the authorized header. Or actually, I guess according to this, I normally do authorization. Authorization. Make it as long as possible. All right, and then we need to give it our secret. And for whatever reason, this is a very weirdly named property or key. Okay, and these properties are predefined configuration for the JWT options. So if we looked at Passport, the JWT strategy for Passport, it would give us this information of what options we could set. All right, and then we already imported our secret up here. So we're going to set our secret or key to our secret. And so we're essentially giving it information of where to find the token and what the key is to decrypt the token, which is that same random string we use to encrypt it. All right, and I'm going to say const JWT login equals new JWT strategy. And then we're going to pass it our options, JWT options. And then we have our callback function. So async and what will our callback function? Okay, so we'll get the payload. So the payload is whatever was in the token, whatever data was in the token. So by the time it makes it to this callback function, our data will be decrypted and we'll have it in this payload object. And then we'll get that done thing again. All right, so now we just have to go through this and do some checks. We need to make sure that the token decrypted to information that makes sense to us. And if it does, then we'll send the user through. So we'll do our try catch block. So try doing some stuff. If that fails, catch it. And if it makes it to the catch, we'll say done. No error. False on the login. Okay, so you did not get logged in. And then we're going to try and find the user. So we're going to say const user equals, we already have the user model in here, right? Users, yeah. So user, and then we're going to say await users dot find one. And to find one, we're going to say where ID is equal to payload dot user ID. Okay, and that's because when we made the token, we made that user ID property. So payload is going to be exactly whatever we created when we created our token. So if payload has a UID property, what other properties does it have?
Email name.
So let's look at where we created our token.
First name and initial with dot.
Nope. So let's go to auth. So this is where we created our token. So this object, okay, so we'll have the UID and timestamp. If we wanted to, we could send other information in there, but I can't think of any other useful information to send at this point in time. We might down the road run across other stuff that might be useful, but I can't think of anything because right here, we're going to find the entire user from the information in the token. So we're going to have all the user information anyways. All right, so we'll, oh, you know what we could actually do? We don't need to do the find one thing. I forgot there's a better way if we have the actual ID. Sorry, guys. There's actually find by primary key, which is our ID. That was there. So find by primary key, and then payload.uid. And then if not user, if no user was found, we could return done, null, false. Okay, so you did not log in. And then if the code makes it to here, that means the user was in the database. We got the user's information, no issues. So we'll call done, null, and then pass it the user. All right, and then the last thing we have to do is we have to tell Passport to use this. So we'll say passport.use, and then JWT login. The microphone's recording, just as an FYI.
That's fine. You're gonna get an email from Bill about a student, Dustin Gomez, who's in the last module one. He needs to be put into the one for this module one because he's just gonna go through the materials.
Okay, Tim would be the person to talk to about that.
Okay.
Yeah, let Tim know. He'll handle it. Thanks, dude. All right, everybody good here? Or think they're good here?
Can you explain a little bit that thing?
What thing?
If no user, so how we can even go inside and find no user?
Well, because right here. So user, if this doesn't find a user, this would be null. So what's the opposite of null?
False.
No, the opposite of null.
Ah, yeah, true.
True. So if this is null, the exclamation point will make this evaluate to true. So then we will do done false. We didn't find a user. Is the if statement being on one line what's throwing you off, or? Because this is either going to return an object with all of our user information, or it's going to return null. So this will be null or our user information. So we're just doing a check. If it's null, then you didn't log in. Is the one line thing messing you up? Do you want to break it up to two lines?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely fine.
Because this is calling the database and trying to find a user based on the user ID we pass it. So it's either going to find a user or it's not. If it doesn't find a user, this will be null.
Are we still in the backend?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is all backend.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Now that we have that, we will do we will go to our routes, and we're going to go to our setup. And then we'll do exports, hopefully with an S, exports dot require basic auth. And then that will equal passport dot authenticate, I believe. Yes. Authenticate. And then we're going to say JWT. And then session false.
What does the session false refer to?
Using sessions. We're saying don't use sessions. No.
What is sessions again?
Sessions are where the server keeps track of people who have come in contact with it, essentially. So you can store information in a session, and that each user will have a unique session information. It's a different way you could handle like logging in and shit too. I'm a bigger fan of this, so, personally. All right, we all good? All right, so now what we could do is we could go to our routes auth index. And in our import from our setup file, the second one I have, your order might be different, but look for where we're importing from our setup file, where we were just working in. We're now going to import our require basic auth.
This index is in which folder? Routes.
Routes auth and then index. And then we're going to set up a route for it. We're going to say router dot get / JWT dash sign dash in, and then require basic auth. And then we need to make a controller for it. Okay, so we'll come back here. We got to make a controller really quick. Everybody good?
Yeah.
All right, so what we'll do now, we'll have to come back to this because we don't have a controller, so we got to make our controller really quick. So we'll go over to controllers, auth. We'll make a new file called JWT underscore sign underscore n .js. Up at the top, we'll say const curly brackets equals require. And we're going to get that little helper function for formatting the user data. So we're going to go back to helpers and then auth. And then we're going to get user data to send. And then we'll say module dot exports equals request response, not read only. And then we will try to do some things. And if that fails, we will catch them. And for now, we'll say response dot status 500 dot send error with JWT sign in. All right, and then it's all we need to do is send the user information forward. So we'll say response dot send And we can throw our success true on there, even though we'll probably never use it. And we'll say user is equal to user data to send, curly brackets, or not curly brackets, parentheses, user dot, not user dot, request dot user. So we almost have a fully functional login system working pretty soon. We're this close. So
So next
close.
time we'll actually be able to be off, done with Fuse off a bit,
Should be, yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, we don't have that much more to go. Might even finish it today.
Let's do it.
Everybody good? All right, now that we have our JWT sign-in controller made, we need to go to our controllers auth index and then add our JWT sign-in. So JWT sign-in and set that to require this directory, JWT sign-in. And then once we have that, we can finally go back to our routes auth index file. And where we're importing sign in and sign up, we should now be able to pull off JWT sign in and then add that to our JWT sign in route. So after require basic auth, we'll say JWT sign in.
So those are actually endpoints.
Yep. Those are endpoints. That is it.
Let's figure it out.
There you go.
Because as I'm thinking, there's no JWT on front end. Maybe sign in and sign up is there, but that one is not there. So it should be something else. Endpoint.
Yep, these are endpoints. All right, everybody good? So what we want to do now is two little things. First, let's look at our terminal and make sure our server isn't crashed. Passport.use, not user.
No. What did you change?
Yeah.
If anybody needs to see any files, let me know. Or if anybody needs any help, let me know.
Is there anything to test thus far?
No, that's what we're gonna do next is set up a couple things on the front end so we can test it. We could use Postman to test it, but what fun is that?
My Might
Stuff
crash
there,
like, I
right?
don't know if
Yeah.
it's
Rob, get,
We just try to sign in again?
There's no way to test this yet.
Okay.
All that matters is the server's not crashed right now.
Should I just stop the server and restart it and see if it does it? Or
No, if the server's crashed, it'll restart itself automatically. So if it's crashed, there's something wrong with the code.
Yeah, it should be wrong.
Yeah.
So let's read what it says. The player basic auth is not defined.
I didn't save the file.
And iShop routes auth index. Routes auth index. So you did require sign in. Sign in. You never required basic auth.
Oh, in the center.
So require basic auth.
Transport that to guys.
And when you save it, it should automatically try and rebuild the server, and you're good now.
That
Do you
case,
need help or are you good?
no, I think figured out what's the problem or where it is.
What's there?
The way that missing function.
Okay, and that's a password. So that means you forgot your.
It's not
Yeah. So async. No wait, just try and resave it because you fixed it.
No, I didn't change anything. That's the error. I didn't fix anything.
It's fixed.
Wait, did I get this right? Async.
Oh yeah, get rid of that part. Yeah, you got an extra.
That's what it was.
You got a function return and a function there.
Alright, that's weird.
Not too many functions. Anybody else? So once again, right now we can't. You don't have to stop it. It should just restart on its own. There's nothing to test quite yet. We're close, but you can't test it. There, as long as your server's running, we'll go from there. Everybody's server's working. No one's server is on fire. All right. So now we're gonna go back to the land of comfort, and we'll go back to the front end for a minute. So we're gonna go to our actions index on the front end. And on our sign in, we're going to say local storage dot set item. And I'll say token. And then response dot token. It's not response dot token. It's response dot data dot token. Response dot data dot token. Are we good? All right, so we'll test this. So you should be able to sign in. Actually, first, before you try that, go to application, go to local storage, localhost 3000, and clear out any local storage you have. So just clear all. Don't want any false positives. All right, once you cleared your local storage, try signing in and see if your local storage gets updated with a token. So scott@mail.com. Yeah, so the token should show up. If it doesn't show up right away, you can try hitting the refresh button. If it still doesn't work, then something else is probably wrong.
This is probably not a dumb question, but what is the difference between how do you differentiate between local storage and cookies?
The data is stored a little bit differently. Like cookies, everything's stored in a string.
Okay.
But
it's kind of doing the same concept, right?
It's doing the same thing. Local storage, you can actually store more data.
Okay.
Local storage doesn't have as bad a connotation as cookies because most people don't know what local storage is.
Okay.
And
so, like, because with websites, a lot of times they have to tell you if they're using cookies.
Mm.
Nowadays, I don't know if that's like some kind of law that was passed, but
yeah, no, you're supposed to, and even local storage, you actually same thing applies.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, what's up?
Oh my gosh, my hair's so long. How are you? How have you been?
So, but like I said, it's pretty much the same thing. I like local storage because it's easier to work with, and local storage doesn't expire. Cookies expire. I mean, you could set them like way in the future, so it'd be like forever before they expire.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you wanted it to automatically delete itself, then cookies are good for that because they do have like a delete at date on them or an expire date. Everyone good? All right, so it's important that you have your token for the next step.
And when we like using our web storage or local storage for different application, like 3 or 5 applications, and we store that thing, token to different applications, and we delete it, so it's gonna message it.
Well, you'll just have to like re-sign in or re-get that information. So each website has its own unique local storage. One website cannot read another website's local storage. But because we're always running on localhost 3000, all your different sites are running essentially at the same web address. So the local storage gets messed up in a dev environment. But like when it's actually a real website, that's not an issue.
It's gonna be on the home local.
Yeah, when it's on an actual website, then it's only the local storage associated with that particular site. And you can only see that local storage when you're on that site, and only that site can see that local storage.
Yep.
But yes, if you're testing a bunch of different sites on localhost 3000, yeah, they're all essentially sharing local storage because it's all the same server name.
Yeah, because as you say, delete everything. And
Yeah.
I came there, I have everything.
Yeah, that's why I had a bunch of crap from other shit I'm working on too. So, all right. So final call. Everyone good?
Yes.
All right. So what we'll do now is we're gonna do a couple things. And first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make a little helper function. We can just define it here even. And let's do it right, just in case we break this up a little bit more down the road. So we should have a helpers folder inside of our SRC folder. There's a little helpers folder index. And inside of it, I'm going to make a new file called redux_helpers.js. And then I will do export auth headers, const auth headers, which will be a fat arrow function. And then in it, we're going to return an object that has headers property, and in that headers property, we'll do our authorization. And we'll say local storage dot get item, call that, and pass it the string token. Okay, so what this is doing, this is essentially building the headers that we need to send with our Axios requests. And this way we don't have to keep rebuilding this object over and over again, though, for every Axios request that we need authorization stuff for.
Why is it called headers?
Because we're setting the headers in the request.
Okay. What does the headers refer to?
The header information in the request. Every time you make a request.
So part of the document or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's just part of. So, like, if you look at any request, even like for the bundle file,
Yeah.
there's response headers and then there's request headers.
Gotcha.
So it's just like general information about the request.
Okay.
So where it accepted coding, language, cache control, connection, cookies.
So headers is something that's always associated with
Requests.
A request.
Yeah, there's always every request has headers in it.
Gotcha.
It's just a matter of what information is being sent along.
Okay.
And you can see like that's where the cookie is being sent.
Yeah.
Has information about like the operating system and browser we're using. Has all kinds of shit that it sends. So we're adding to that our token, and we made up a property called authorization, and we're sending our token on that property. We could have just it's easily called it Scooby-Doo and sent our token. It doesn't really matter. As long as on the back end, we were checking Scooby-Doo for the token. So, but authorization makes sense because that's what it is. All right, everybody good with their little auth headers helper? Excellent. All right, and then over in our index helpers, our index helpers, we're going to say const redux equals require this directory redux helpers. And then we're going to say redux. Let's actually deconstruct this. So we're going to say ... redux. Just so it's easier to pull the stuff from it. I don't want to use a Redux object. I just want the functions I want. All right, everybody with me? All right, now we will go back to our actions index. And then we're going to do export const JWT sign n equals nothing, and then async dispatch. And try catch and console.log error with JWT sign n error. I'm going to say const response equals await axios.get /auth JWT-sign-n. And then we need to send the headers along. But for that, we need to import our little helper function we made at the top. So we'll say import curly brackets from backup directory helpers. And we should be able to get auth headers. There it is. And so as the second argument of get, we will call auth headers, which will return our config object, like so. And then we'll console.log JWT sign in response. And response, I'm gonna say response. Yeah, we'll do it like that. All right, we're like 2 steps away from testing this. See if all this JWT hard work's paid off. Everyone good?
Okay, you can keep going, so not slowing up. I'm gonna catch up later. Just keep going.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, so you circle back around to the end here. All right, so now if we jump over to our main index file, so src index.js. We're going to import a couple things. We'll say import curly brackets from this directory actions.
Go forward with this again.
src. Yeah, this is the main index. Yep. All right, and then from actions, we want to import the JWT sign-in. And then we also want to import our types object. So we'll say import types from this directory, actions, types. All right, so we imported the JWT sign-in from actions and imported types from actions types. And then after we create the store, but before we do all the other crap, we're going to do a check. We're going to say if local storage dot get item token and we're going to do a couple things. One, we're going to say store dot dispatch, and then we're going to send our action type will be types dot sign in. All right. So we're just going to, as soon as we check to see if there's a token, we're just going to kind of log them in. But we haven't actually logged them in. So once we've done that, we're kind of going, we're going to trust them for half a second. But then we're going to immediately call our JWT sign in. And we are going to call that. That's going to return a function. We're going to call that return function. And that returned function, we're going to pass store.dispatch. And then if something goes wrong in there, it will immediately log us back out. Okay, so we're going to just, so everything's fast, we're going to say, okay, you're logged in. But then we're going to actually call the server and validate the token and everything, make sure they are logged in. If they are, great, we won't do anything else. If they're not, then we will log them out. And there's really no security risk here because at the very worst, they'll see a blank page that they shouldn't have seen. but they're not going to see any data. There's no way they can see like data or anything like that they shouldn't be able to see. They might for half a second access a page they shouldn't have, but they wouldn't have been able to get any of the data for that page. So we should be able to get the console log from our JWT. So JWT sign in response, and we should have all the actual user data on it. And now that should just, whenever you refresh your page, the app is automatically making that call. It's sending the web token to the server. The server's checking that web token. If it's a valid web token, it pulls the user from it and from the database, and then we're sending the user to us.
In this section.
So should we clear the token before we do that, or try and log in?
If you clear the token, it won't work.
What if you, oh, got you.
Yeah.
I'm getting says error with JWT sign in here. Request. Oh, should I need to log in? That's fine.
No, yeah, that's what's checking now. Yeah, your token's there. Position, so somewhere in your backing code, it's not loading there. You didn't change this, I changed it. Authorize. So it's just looking at the wrong spot.
Alright.
See? So we're sending an authorization.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
this
match.
has to match because we're telling it where what header to check for.
That's it.
You shouldn't get the success code.
Oh, I should.
So the people here.
Start that.
That one thing.
Yeah, he's starting with it.
No. It should just be if you have the token, it should be trying to. It's not, or it's not getting a response back. So.
Okay, what I have to expect in here now.
I should say, well, at least what I got was JWT sign in.
Wait.
When you just
Let's not get it this far, so let's go back to it.
the JWT sign in. As soon as you save it, it should basically, because the token should still be there, and then you should.
No, I don't have that one.
Oh, well, your import up there on the auth headers, you could erase that one empty one for one, and then
No, I have to take this one off.
to take it off. You just you just adjust it.
Yeah, I have to put it here out.
Sasha.
It's gonna be now.
No, but you already had it. All you have to do
No,
is
that one was one.
yeah, you just have to take out the end.
Working.
So
we're getting-
now I have to log in.
Oh, man.
No, I mean.
Can you go back to the other one?
HRG. Once they're done, it's not defined.
Comment on.
If we can call it, I just missed that. Alright, engine.
Go into your.
That should work, yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, mine's.
What, did you get caught up or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not working.
Oh,
Something is not working. I'm still not having that.
yeah, we're
So internal server error.
so we just get is not.
Should not be an internal server error.
Give myself a time, service report.
Actually, let's. That is not what I wanted to do.
No. iShop is in here.
Alright.
Everyone.
Okay, collect function with that and object.
Oh, this one must be open. This thing, this yellow thing here, this thing.
Let's do start. Okay, no, it's fine.
What do you get?
Got a 4 1 there.
Server, let's do.
Series works?
The what?
Here.
Even this
Ah,
up here.
well, I can see the problem already. Send.
My video stuff.
Yeah, whatever.
Someone should put the.
Let's see.
Huh?
Everything's safe, right?
Yeah, there you go. Should
What's
have
the track?
data.
What's that?
There you go.
Thank you.
My turn.
Every first page.
What was your problem?
He has a 4
I didn't.
Every user get is not a function. That's front end error. So go to your actions index.
This was my.
JWT sign in. Go to auth headers. So actions.
Oh.
Or not actions, but helpers. Yeah, read helpers. There you go. Local source.get item. Capital I. Get item is the name of the function.
Oh.
There you go.
And you can take. Yay, okay.
Everybody else? Were you starting trouble with yours?
Yeah, I'm the 4 1 there.
So you're not authorized. So you probably have to change the header name. So let's push through this. Now we're sign in.
You good, Sasha? That's good.
JWT sign in.
You're always good. Not all the time.
Like myself, yes. I have some typos all the time, but I finish something.
Yay.
Why are we calling?
It's, for me, it's not easy to watch and type.
No, it's working. JWT sign in response. Yeah, you're good.
Wait, why did it do it the first time? I don't understand.
I have no idea what shit first.
It's sign in.
No, you don't need to sign in.
Actually,
This is
it's,
just refreshing the page.
it's going.
Because you have that
Oh,
token
because
stored,
it's-
so it's sending the token,
Gotcha.
and then it's logging you.
Gotcha.
Give you all your user information.
The speaker to this one.
Everybody's working?
Yeah.
Alright, go ahead and add push. Don't merge it yet. We have a little bit more cleanup, a little bit more to handle on the front end. The back end is pretty solid. So we just got to clean up the front end and get all the actual, like, got to find the front, actually doing something with the data that, because right now we're just console logging all the data. We're not actually doing anything with any of it. And then once we get the front end working and stuff, then we'll go through it kind of again of like how all this is working together. I know it's kind of a little all over the place right now, but it's kind of hard to explain until we get the whole thing working. But once we have the whole thing working, hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit better how it's going on.
Are you meeting up that one? Or?
No, that's it for today.
Just exit out of that.
Thank you, Scott. Like, sure.
Yeah, that's just console logging that user. You could delete that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
So yeah, but Control C.
Oh, control.
Or yeah, Control C selects it, yeah, always. Anytime you're
Oh.
Control C almost always works. Go to really quick though, passport, yeah, delete that console.
Oh, it's really gone. Okay.
Yeah, that's what you were saying, was that
Oh.
result.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, no problem. And then I will be in contact via the normal channels, the drop zone at the park, check under the trash can at noon on Friday, and you'll have the next meeting date.
Wait for that package.
Yeah. Now I'll let you guys know. Hopefully by the end of the week, if not the end of the week, early next week, of when we can meet again. I'll try and do it sooner rather than later, though, so you guys have time to prepare and make sure you can be here and everything. All right. I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Ben.